Episode 142, Objective Moral Truth is a Lie. This is Matthew, and in this episode of Still Unbelievable, I'll be reviewing an episode of Warner Wallace's Cold Case Christianity podcast, where he tries to make a case for objective morality being explained by his preferred God. Warner Wallace is infamous for his Cold Case Christianity book, which allegedly claims to be his story of discovery by investigating God like a detective. His podcast is not a good example of honest detective work, and in this review of his case for objective morality, we'll see why. Word of warning, there is so much to comment on in this episode that I've added more interjections than any other episode I have ever done. If this is too much for you as a listener, please let me know. reasonpress@gmail.com. Feedback on what is good and bad is always useful. And on that note, please do add a review of Still Unbelievable to wherever you get your podcasts. It helps others, and it certainly helps us.
We're going to talk about an evidence for God's existence that some folks are kind of overlooked. They take it for granted. And that is that objective, transcendent moral truths are best explained by God's existence.
Warner will promise us that objective, transcendent moral truths are best explained by God's existence. If you're puzzled by what objective, transcendent moral truths actually means, stick around. The great Jay will no doubt explain all. And not only that, he'll show us that not only why they exist, but how they can validate the existence of his preferred God, and how those objective, transcendent truths are best explained by that God.
There are a number of objective, transcendent moral principles that we take for granted that we employ every day.
That's his bold claim, and he's going to stand by it.
And we sometimes think that they created these for ourselves, or they've emerged some other way, without realizing that, in fact, the best explanation for such objective, transcendent moral truths is in the foundation, the existence of a transcendent, objective moral truth giver.
We have the setup now for the evidence. Mr. Wallace is going to cold case the shit out of this and leave us all in awe.
The first step in even trying to understand this or trying to explain this to anybody or trying to even assess it for ourselves is to really first ask the question, are there really objective, transcendent moral truths?
I agree. Before establishing a giver, we must first confirm that there is a gift. Are there really objective, transcendent moral truths? Let's hope he also defines what these terms mean. It would be very unfortunate if he declares moral truths to exist without defining how they meet the definition of objective and transcendent.
The vast majority of people in our culture really struggle with this, and the church is not much better.
I find insulting my audience is a great tactic too. Oops.
About, I think, 22%, as with the last poll that Barna did, of the culture, the adult population, actually believe that objective, transcendent moral truths exist at all.
There is no link on the original site. Shame on you for not referencing your sources, Mr. Wallace. But I did find a link on the Barna site. See show note number 2. But it is dated a few weeks after the podcast episode, so it is unlikely to be the original source. But if you want to go searching for yourself, that link is a good start. Barna is a Christian polling organisation, so expect a specific brand of Christianese in the reporting. The link does indicate that there is confusion in what objective moral truths actually means. Maybe Jay will clear that up while he's proving its existence.
In our common experience of dealing with moral issues, we sometimes will kind of struggle to see that these kinds of transcendent truths exist, especially when it seems like different situations call for different kinds of responses.
That's why they are not objective. They are subject to the situational context.
If you use whatever force necessary to stop someone who's trying to take your life, a deadly attack on your life, you can use whatever force is necessary to resist that attack, including deadly force.
Great example. Taking a life is a crime when it's premeditated, but not when it's self-defense. The level of wrongness is subjective, depending on the situation. Does Jay have a clever definitional clause that gets him out of this apparent cock-up?
So you see, there do seem to be certain situations in which what we would commonly think of as objective, transcendent moral principles, like you should never kill anybody, seem to be, well, maybe not, maybe so, maybe not, depends on the situation.
So which is it, Mr. Detective? Are our moral principles objective or subjective?
Can you say that it's never okay to lie?
No, but awesome avoiding my question there.
It seems that even as Christians, we are kind of fuzzy on whether or not there are objective, transcendent moral principles.
This would be a lot shorter if we didn't have to endure the full phrase objective, transcendent, moral, blah, each time. Did you notice how it's not truth anymore, but principles? I wonder how many more times the definition will shift.
But the reality, of course, is we can discover these and we can see the foundation of objective moral truth by simply adding an expression, is it ever okay to kill for the fun of it? Well, no. Is it okay to lie just for the fun of it?
Well, this is a weird turn. Self-defense is never for the fun of it, but it is still a valid scenario in which one can kill another. Lying to a friend because you have a surprise party planned is lying for the fun of it. So this point is humorously dumb.
These are objective, transcendent moral principles that every culture has upheld.
Apart from the examples we just gave.
Nobody has ever thought, nobody ever will think it's okay, it's morally acceptable to kill someone for the fun of it.
Didn't Christians get thrown to the lions for the fun of it? Isn't that what we're led to believe? Seems our detective didn't detect so good. See the link at 3 for some examples of humans being hunted for sport. The literal definition of killing for the fun of it.
To torture babies for fun.
Yay, I win. Did you have this one on your bingo card?
If you're denying that there are such things as objective moral principles, transcendent moral principles.
Principles or truths, Jay? Which one are you going with? And yes, I deny they are objective. I don't torture babies, for fun or otherwise, because I recognise when harm is being done, and I don't like to see sentient creatures being harmed. I do not need any nebulous claim of objectivity in order to be a decent fucking human being.
Wouldn't you agree that torturing babies for the fun of it is wrong? Objectively, transcendently, inherently, there's no way you can justify such a thing.
When I say that torturing babies for fun is wrong, it is because I believe that causing intentional harm to any sentient creature for your own pleasure is a perverted act done by a deviant mind. I believe that any individual who does that lacks a basic appreciation of dignity in others. I also believe that the effects of that harm create trauma in the recipient individual and increase the likelihood that they will struggle to become a fully functioning member of their community. Therefore, torturing babies for fun isn't just a harm in the moment, it is a future harm that will affect others. None of this reasoning requires an objective, transcendent moral standard. It is basic recognition of cause and effect. And since I consider the effect to be counterproductive, I label the cause as wrong.
I've actually had this conversation where people will say, well, I cannot say with certainty, I cannot say as a matter of judgment that this is objectively, transcendently wrong. Really?
Yes, really. I do not have access to any objective rule that says I can't torture a baby for fun. All I have access to is my personal feeling of disgust at the idea for the reasons I have just given. So Jay, if you think there is an objective standard that has this rule, please show me where I can find it.
You can't say that it's objectively, transcendently wrong to torture babies for fun?
No, I can't, because I do not have access to where that rule is written down. Show me the location of the objective rule.
Tell you what, we got bigger issues.
Damn straight we've got bigger issues. You declare there is an objective transcendent rule, but you can't point me to it. You can't show me how to find it. You can't give details of the location of this rule. You simply declare it exists and assume you're right without justification. That's our issue. I have justified my reasoning for considering it wrong to torture babies for fun, but you only think it's wrong because there is a nebulous rule that says you can't do it. You are the shitty person on the leash here. You are the bigger problem.
Than whether or not we should talk about God's existence and make the case for God's existence through objective moral issues if you don't even believe that torturing babies for fun is a no-no.
And there's the bullshit equivocation. Thinking it's a no-no does not require an objective moral standard, Mr. Wallace. This is where fundy Christian thinking goes off the rails. Warner Wallace cannot comprehend that someone thinks torturing babies for fun is wrong without his idea of objective morals being true. He is so locked into his indoctrinated mindset that he is incapable of appreciating the nuance of other views. That's the problem here.
These kinds of principles are so plainly true.
Great, then show us how it is true. When you state it as though it is fact, but refuse to justify it, that makes you the problem.
That we really shouldn't have to make a strong case for these kinds of objective, transcendent moral principles.
You lazy, shitty fucktard. You do not get to make that statement and move on without justification. This is lazy apologetics.
I think when you look at all the alternatives that are typically offered to explain the existence of transcendent, objective moral truths, they all fail.
They fail because there is no such thing as objective, transcendent moral truths. Take a break, Jay. Think about subjectivity for a few minutes and ask yourself, why so many Christians take a different view of certain things being wrong? If they believe in God and yet come to different opinions, what does that tell you about moral truths, Jay? Come on, step out of your closed-minded thinking for a few minutes.
Unless, of course, these kinds of truths are grounded in the nature of God.
Or they don't exist at all.
Objective moral truths are grounded in the very nature of God.
What the fuck does that even mean? I fucking hate fundy Christianese.
If God exists, you have these truths.
Where do they exist? How do I access them? Stop assuming you're right and show us your work.
One approach that's commonly taken is to say, well, these are somehow grounded in your genetic evolution. They're part of your DNA.
No one says our genetics is a source for objective, transcendent moral truths. This is a very different explanation. You're straw-manning like a fuck.
Those people who happen to employ these kinds of behaviors have a tendency to exist, to survive better, and as a result, they pass this kind of genetic behavioral material onto their descendants.
Not a strictly accurate description of how behavior traits evolve in a group. It shows how fundy Christian thinking perverts scientific explanations. But it is close enough for this discussion.
So now we have a group that accepts certain objective, transcendent moral principles based on their genetic evolution.
Except they are neither objective nor transcendent. They are subjective within the group context. Fuck me, this guy's a tool.
Well, if that's the case, I could see some serious problems with how we might interact with one another.
So can I.
And the first one is that I think that this view empowers relativism.
Yes, because everything is relative.
How could you judge another group whose genetic pathway is different than yours?
By your own standard of what you think is right or wrong.
Why would you say that your genetic pathway that got you to today is somehow superior to mine?
Because mine does not require a threat of hell to not be a dick.
Your moral views are also grounded in you as the subject, which means all moral truth is subjective.
Yes.
The folks who want to claim that DNA is a source for what we would call objective moral truths, they deny subjectivity.
Who actually claims this, Warner? Give me references to someone who makes that claim. Inventing this mythological person, then arguing against him, is how you expose your own intellectual vacuity.
But there's another problem with this view, and that this view also liberates us from any responsibility.
Nope, it most certainly does not. We are still responsible for the acts that we carry out, and the society we live in will punish us for breaking the rules of that society.
You know, my genetic heritage gave you my eye color. If that is what is the source for objective moral beliefs, not objective, but moral beliefs, they would be subjective in this case. Well, then we got a problem.
That problem being your ability to comprehend nuance.
You can't accuse me of my hair color. You can't accuse me of my eye color. You can't accuse me of some feature of my anatomy. Well, if my moral choices are also grounded in my DNA, how in the world could you accuse me of wrongdoing?
Because it is more complex than that. There is a bigger picture of nuance. Our behaviour is not a strict binary reaction to our genetic preferences. It is also a response to learned conditions, to education, to how we are treated. Beat a kid for misbehaving, and you create an adult that uses violence to control others. Our moral intuitions are a product of both our genetic preferences and the environment in which we grow up.
The last view, I think, the problem with this view, is that this view assumes a common encoder.
Huh?
A great book out there by Stephen C. Meyer.
Oh dear, Stephen C. Meyer. the creationist liar.
Stephen C. Meyer, I think, is one of the most important apologists right now on the planet. I think he's perfectly positioned to be able to think clearly and to communicate clearly the problems with scientism.
Uh-oh, stand by for a bullshit diversion.
This view that everything can be determined by applying science.
Well, science is the source of everything that we know now.
Well, Stephen has written a book called Signature in the Cell, in which he talks about, well, look, not only is DNA information, it's the highest level of information.
Huh? What the fuck does that even mean? You've moved off topic a bit here, Wallace baby. So far you've failed to justify your belief in objective transcendent moral truths, you've bathed your description of how subjective morality evolves, and now you're shooting off on a tangent.
DNA molecules communicate marching orders to proteins, expecting the proteins to respond in a certain way, and sure enough, those proteins actually do.
Okay, I guess.
It is the highest level of information, and the problem, of course, with any source of information is that you cannot find a single example in the history of the entire universe in which information comes from anything other than intelligence.
Where's the intelligence in my DNA? Can you point to the intelligence part of the DNA that creates all of this information?
If your moral truths, the moral principles that you hold, are grounded in your DNA, then they're grounded in encoded DNA, which has to come from an intelligent source.
Great. Show us how you identify and validate that source.
This might explain why we have objective transcendent. Even if you believed that it's in your DNA, you'd have to accept that there's a common objective transcendent genetic encoder.
Not really, unless you are so close-minded in your thinking that you are incapable of comprehending other options.
So to say that DNA is the source of this does not get you off the hook in terms of explaining how it is we have objective transcendent moral principles.
Apart from the inconvenient fact that objective transcendent moral principles have not been established, they've only been asserted.
Possible that this is a part of kind of a larger group think. In other words, that objective transcendent principles emerge, or any kind of moral principle emerges as a result of what cultures embrace, what cultures craft, what they mold, what they shape in order to get along successfully.
Yes, this is closer to reality. Individual behaviour is moulded by the culture it is born into. Behaviour that is counterproductive to the group is discouraged and therefore selected out. It's not really a difficult concept. One wonders why it is so hard to grasp. Maybe it's because it relegates Wallace's morality-giving God to an irrelevant idea.
When you've got any number of folks who are living together and you want to survive better, aren't these just the principles that you embrace in order to survive?
A bit oversimplistic, but okay.
If that's the case, this is really a matter of utilitarianism, isn't it? We create and utilize certain moral principles because they benefit us in some way.
That benefit being we live in a cohesive society and we are productive within it. What's wrong with that?
I mean, wouldn't this be a way of explaining why we all seem to have certain similar moral principles? If you look at some of the teaching of the Golden Rule.
Probably.
Well, couldn't you argue that these are just creations of different theistic groups that are trying their best to craft codes that actually are useful in cultures?
Probably.
Well, a couple of things about that. Number one, if that's the case, we'd have the same kind of problem we have with the relativism at the individual basis of subjects who are claiming different genetic backgrounds. We have the same kind of problem with cultural groups. So, for example, you'd have a problem being able to argue between which culture gets to decide a moral view. If you've got a culture, for example, that's across the country that is sterilizing young girls, and you don't think that's actually something that should happen, how could you argue with that culture?
You certainly couldn't argue from an objectively superior position, because there is no such thing. If you disagree, then you use reasoning to try to change their minds, like productive fucking grown-ups. What you don't do is go missionary on them and force them to behave according to your standards by using threat and coercion.
You can say, hey, look, they get to say, look, if all rules emerge from cultural utility and they decide that it's more useful to do that, how in the world could you stop them?
Using the process I just outlined. Or if they really are unworkable ideas, then maybe the culture will fail under its own poor management.
Well, I guess you could get a bunch of countries together, United Nations, and kind of come down as a group and say, hey, we want that behavior to stop.
Yeah, certainly, we could. I endorse that idea on the basis that it would include reasonings for why.
Really? So you're saying that the sheer numbers of people determine what's right and wrong? If I get more countries to align with my moral views, I can impose my moral views on another country, another culture? Really?
No, good reasoning should triumph, not might in numbers. I wonder why a Christian would miss that.
So okay, how about this then? Whatever China believes today, you Americans better be ready to accept, because they outnumber you guys. They outnumber all of us.
In today's news, Christian completely misunderstands logic and thinking and reasoning.
And if that's the case, whatever they view as true about moral behavior, you're going to have to embrace it, because after all, numbers are what matter.
Still not getting it, are you, Mr. J? Oh well, maybe we can move on.
Right? No, I don't think so. As a matter of fact, you know that there would be no moral reformers if all cultures determine what's morally true. Because typically, moral reformers are always begin in the minority position within a culture.
And they change the culture by exposing bad ideas and actively promoting better ideas.
Arguing against a view held by the majority. The same thing happened here in the 50s and 60s, right? When you had people saying, hey, it's not right to treat African Americans as though they're some lesser form of human than the white Americans.
Not really a great point for a fundamentalist Christian to swing on. 400 years? Really? You want to try to win on this point?
Well, how can you do that? Well, I'll tell you what, if you had taken a poll in the 50s, the vast majority of people in the country would have voted against changing the laws. They were more than happy with segregation.
And the population was majority Christian that supported that. Don't forget to say that very important detail when you make this point.
But when Martin Luther King makes a case that this is wrong, he made it initially from a position of the fewest number of people in the country, not the greatest number of people. He made that case as a position of the smaller group, not the larger group. But if larger groups are what decide what's morally true, he would be in an immoral position by definition. He's part of the smaller group.
And because his ideas did win out, the truth is not decided by group size, but by something else. You know, like the strength of the argument. This labouring of a straw man point is utterly tedious.
You see, he's appealing to something that transcends the smaller group and the larger group. He appealed to a transcendent source of truth.
So did those who disagreed with him, so that doesn't really work either. So, you know, strength of argument.
Basically, he was able to wag his finger at the larger group and say, you guys should know better, not based on what you guys say about this, but based on what you know is true and transcends both of us.
I am aware that King was a Christian and argued from a position of objective moral standards that could be accessed. This does not lend credence to Warner Wallace's argument, though, because at the same time that King made his arguments, Christians who opposed him used the same objective argument to try to maintain the status quo. Invoking King does not help the argument for objective morality. King's ideas won out because they were better ideas. This is practical subjectivity in action.
So I don't think we can get to moral truths by culture, but on that...
Maybe looking for moral truths is the wrong activity. How about trying to build a culture that works? Maybe trying to tag truth to morality is the completely wrong thing to do.
It's one thing to say you've got a rule that is useful in your culture, but that does not explain where that moral truth comes from.
Maybe it's not a moral truth after all. And where it's come from is easy. From us, our minds, our thinking, our intellect.
It's one thing to say that we are applying a moral truth, that it has some utilitarian purpose. This does not explain where it came from.
You know what? I actually feel sorry for people who can't get out of their mind that morality only comes from a transcendent, objective God being. We are humans, we are intelligent, we are capable of coming up with these ideas yourselves. And I pity the fool who doesn't get
liken this whole approach to a chess game. If you wonder what moves are good and what moves are bad in a chess game, you can discover those or know those good and bad moves by simply knowing what the objective of the game is. If you know the objective of the game is to capture the king, well, any move that helps you capture the king, you could call a good move. Any move that hurts your chance of capturing the king, you would have to identify as a bad move.
So good and bad moves are dependent upon the position you are in, measured against the objective that you want to achieve. Okay, great. I'm still seeing support for subjectivity here.
Well, couldn't the same thing be said of moral truths? If, in fact, we know the objective of the game of life. If the objective, for example, is human flourishing, well, then couldn't we say that any move that aids in human flourishing is a good move, and any move that hinders human flourishing is a bad move? In a sense,
I am very happy to play this game. Human flourishing means acting in a caring way towards same-sex attracted people and to trans people. Fundy Christians harming them is not human flourishing.
we're all humans. This is the one aspect of our existence that transcends all of us as individuals and all of us as cultures. The thing that transcends us is our identity as humans. The human species is what transcends all of this. Well, now we're at a place where we can identify and we could actually recognize why we have objective, transcendent moral truths, because we all are human beings, and the best thing we can do is flourish.
This would be a strong point if Wallace wasn't so vocal against the flourishing of same-sex attracted people, or trans people, or atheists, or those who need an abortion, or those who belong to another religion. The objective standard that Wallace supports is limited to the flourishing of the humans he approves of.
Lots of folks would take the view that, hey, tell you what, if I can destroy you and your culture, I've got better access to resources, to oil, to other. I can improve the survivability of my culture by doing something hideous to yours.
The biggest offender of this is religious ideology.
We're talking about human flourishing. Now hang on. What does that mean? It sounds like Sam Harris and others are saying that there's a certain way to survive.
Flourishing or survival, Mr. Wallace. Stop switching around the words you're using. They don't mean the same thing. Flourishing does not automatically mean survival. If it's survival you mean, then that would be having offspring live long enough to have their own offspring.
A certain moral way to survive.
It's possible to survive immorally. Many Christians have proved that.
There's the problem. You are importing a moral view of survival that you don't yet have.
Only if survival is dependent on a specific moral code, which it isn't.
Because you're trying to explain why there are moral ways to survive. You can't begin by saying, well, because we're all seeking a moral way to survive.
Once more for the dim. A specific set of moral rules does not equate to survival.
And that's the biggest problem I see with this view, is it has to import, it has to steal something from our the existence of a transcendent, objective moral lawgiver.
No, for fuck's sake.
A certain kind way to live, or a loving way to live, or a way, whatever you want to say flourishing entails.
Flourishing or survival. Make your fucking mind up.
It entails apparently more than survival. But if all we have is an evolutionary process of a bunch of folks in the same species who are trying to survive, flourishing, if you're going to give it certain parameters, that's not the goal here.
Whose goal? Evolution doesn't care about flourishing. Evolution needs survival in order to operate. How that happens is frankly irrelevant. It's compassionate, intelligent humans that want flourishing. They want to live the best possible life that is available to them.
Your DNA cares more about being passed on to the next generation of DNA holders than anything else.
Yes, that's what I just said.
Survivability is the goal, and that often results in terrible behaviors, immoral behaviors.
Immoral by what standard? I consider worship of an all-powerful God to be immoral.
In the end, the clearest presentation of why we have obligations, and think about it.
Culture. Culture gives us obligations.
I'm not obligated to my police car. I'm obligated to my police partner, though.
Those are the conditions of your employment, and I'm pretty sure they would say you are obligated to look after the property that they give you to use. Fucking hell.
Why? Because moral obligations are between people, persons.
Exactly. We are obligated by the culture within which we live, and we are obligated to the other people who are within that culture, because those are the rules of the culture. Hurrah! He's got there!
Not between me and the laws of physics, me and inanimate matter, me and chemistry.
Me and your imaginary sky daddy.
No. We have moral obligations between persons. If there is an objective, transcendent moral obligation.
And we're back to this again. It can't be objective, transcendental when it's between persons. Shit!
It would have to be between us and an objective, transcendent moral lawgiver, a person.
Oh, he's including God in his definition of person. Well, this is going to be fucking awkward.
Laws of physics do not cause us to feel obligated.
Did anybody say otherwise?
And so this is why I think the best and most reasonable source, given that all the other explanations fall short, is in the existence of an objective, transcendent moral lawgiver, which we of course would identify as God.
Says the man who is incapable of considering any other option because he is already predisposed and pre-committed to the idea of his God. Therefore it's impossible for him to consider any other option. Wow, talk about intellectual vacuity.
Hope that helps you to think clearly about this issue.
Well, has it? reasonpress@gmail.com for all and any feedback. You have been listening to a podcast from Reason Press. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.